What did happen was the Idaho State Supreme Court, they basically issued an order saying they were going to cancel all court proceedings unless they were like emergency or really had to get done. And that does extend to evictions.
Well, speaking of Governor Jay Inslee, let's get into some of the policies and orders that he has enacted and compare and contrast them to the orders of the neighboring states, specifically Idaho. You're in a unique position in that you cover both of those areas from an inland Northwest perspective, and you kind of straddle the border almost literally. So I just wonder, can we talk a little bit about some of those differences and similarities between what has happened in Idaho and Washington and how the governors have enacted those policies and on what timelines?
Well, they're two very different states. As people who live in Washington and Idaho know, Washington is, to use the terminology of today, a blue state, and Idaho is a red state. We have a Republican governor of Idaho and a Democratic governor of Washington. And so I think that kind of lays the foundation for how they're reacting. But more importantly, I believe, is Washington, as most people know, had the first confirmed case in the nation and also the first death from COVID in the nation. And so Washington State was ahead of the curve in that sense. So it all came to Washington first. And so the first orders, as far as closing schools, telling restaurants to close their dining rooms, issuing a stay-at-home order, all of that happened first in Washington and then later came to Idaho. The thing that kind of shows the big difference in the state, and it kind of makes me laugh a little bit, is the list of essential businesses between the two. They're very similar. You have, healthcare workers have to go to work, gas stations have to stay open, grocery stores have to stay open in both states. But there are some minor differences. In Idaho, gun stores remain open. Washington, those have been closed. And here in Washington, places like bicycle mechanics remain open. Retail cannabis stores, which don't even exist in Idaho, those remain open here. So those are some pretty interesting differences between the two. Beyond that, schools have been shut down. State parks have largely been shut down in both of those cases. Another small difference is golf courses in Washington State have all been closed. In Idaho, golf courses remain open. So there's these little fringe differences between the two. But by and large, both governors, both Jay Inslee and Brett Little, have said, please don't go outside or please don't go to places where people are congregating, and please don't gather in large groups of people. Just stay at home and be safe.
Real quickly, though, one difference, though, again, that is pretty stark is the differences in eviction policies, right? Because people are very worried about, rent coming due around the first of the month. And there's some differences there that seem to be sort of interesting and intriguing that you reported on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. That's a major difference, I'd say. In Washington State, they've put a moratorium on evictions for people who are past due in rent. Attorney General Bob Ferguson and the governor have both spoken pretty strongly in saying, do not kick people out. We already have a homeless problem in our state and in our nation. Don't make it worse when people are losing their jobs from this. In Idaho, the governor has not issued such a proclamation. From what I've heard, he explored it and decided, or was told, he probably couldn't do it because of the Constitution. So he threw it to the legislature, and the legislature didn't act on it. What did happen was the Idaho State Supreme Court, they basically issued an order saying they were going to cancel all court proceedings unless they were like emergency or really had to get done. And that does extend to evictions. Now, if somebody's getting evicted because of illegal drug trafficking or production, they can still be evicted. But when it comes to these run-of-the-mill, somebody's behind on rent, they won't get kicked out of their house. That's from what I understand. Now, it's a kind of a complex issue. Nobody from the governor's office or from the legislature would respond to me, and even the state Supreme Court kind of pushed it off. But talking to housing advocates and tenants' rights groups, that's what's happening in Idaho.
Nick Deshais, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here. Nice to see you.
You can see more of Nick's reporting on these and other topics at nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.